The time has come for every Indian to wake up and see the reality unfolding at the nation's borders. This isn't about politics anymore. This isn't about left or right. This is about survival. This is about dignity. This is about whether India will stand tall or be torn apart by those who smile while sharpening their knives. Right now, as you watch this video, something shocking is happening on India's eastern border. A crisis is unfolding that most Indians don't even know about, but it could change everything. Bangladesh, the country India helped create in 1971, is turning against India. Hindu families are being attacked. Indian territory is being claimed as Bangladeshi land. Mobs are burning Indian flags in the streets of Dhaka. And behind all this chaos, China might just be pulling the strings. The friendship India paid for with the blood of its soldiers is being thrown back in the nation's face. The country India saved from genocide now calls India the enemy. And the really scary part? This is just getting started. In this video, we're going to expose the full story, from what's really happening to Hindus in Bangladesh, to China's master plan to surround India, to Sheikh Hasina's dramatic escape, and most importantly, what India needs to do right now before it's too late. If you care about India's security, if you want to understand the biggest threat on our eastern border, stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Let's get started. Bangladesh, the nation that India gave birth to through sacrifice and blood, has become India's most serious nightmare on its eastern border. The same Bangladesh that India liberated from Pakistani genocide in 1971 is now closer to Pakistan than to India. The same Bangladesh that once celebrated victory over Pakistani military rule now openly dreams of breaking India apart and creating Greater Bangladesh by annexing India's northeastern states. This isn't just random social media propaganda. In October 2025, Bangladesh's interim Prime Minister Muhammad Yunus personally gifted a book to a visiting Pakistani general, showing India's entire northeastern region as Bangladeshi territory. This wasn't some street protester. This was the acting head of Bangladesh's government in an official capacity. The leader of a country that wouldn't exist without India's intervention just gave a book to a Pakistani military official showing Indian territory as Bangladeshi land. Recently, a controversial figure named Sharif Osman Hadi was killed under disputed circumstances, and all the blame immediately fell on India without any investigation. This person had openly supported the Greater Bangladesh movement and made speeches about separating India's northeast. His death became the perfect rallying point for massive anti-India violence. On December 16th, when Bangladesh celebrates Victory Day, commemorating their 1971 freedom from Pakistan instead of remembering the sacrifices that made that freedom possible, they organized massive resistance rallies against what they called Indian hegemony. They called India vultures who supposedly dominate Bangladesh. Think about the staggering irony here. If India actually wanted to control Bangladesh, why would India have granted them independence in 1971? India's military had completely defeated the Pakistani army in one of the most decisive victories in modern military history. India had won back that land through conquest. Historically and culturally, Bangladesh had been East Bengal, an integral part of Indian civilization for thousands of years. India had every possible right to keep that territory, but India deliberately chose friendship over conquest, generosity over domination. And this is how Bangladesh repays that extraordinary sacrifice. On August 5, 2024, Bangladesh's elected Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had to flee her country as violent mobs surrounded her residence. She arrived in India seeking emergency refuge, and New Delhi did what India has always done throughout its history. India opened its doors and offered safe shelter, asking nothing in return. This is the same thing India did when it gave refuge to the Dalai Lama. The same thing India did for Sheikh Hasina herself back in 1975 when her father was assassinated. But Bangladesh's new interim government saw this humanitarian generosity as unwanted interference. They started demanding that India hand over Sheikh Hasina as if she were some international criminal. They completely forgot that without India's intervention, Bangladesh wouldn't even exist. They forgot the 10 million refugees India sheltered, the billions of dollars India spent. the soldiers who died liberating their grandparents. Now, emboldened by their successful coup, Bangladesh's leaders are openly saying that if India can shelter Sheikh Hasina, then Bangladesh has every right to give safe haven to separatist terrorists from India's northeast. They're equating humanitarian refuge for an elected prime minister with supporting armed terrorists who want to break up India. The Indian High Commission in Dhaka is being attacked repeatedly by organized mobs who keep threatening to repay their 1971 debt by freeing India's seven sisters. So why is Bangladesh behaving exactly like East Pakistan did before 1971? Why is history repeating itself in such an obvious pattern? The answer to this question does not lie in Dhaka or in the streets of Bangladesh. The answer lies in Beijing, in the strategic planning rooms of the Chinese Communist Party. This is about great power competition. In Bangladesh is the chess piece being moved around the board. Sheikh Hasina ruled Bangladesh with a firm hand for 15 consecutive years. During her long tenure, Indo-Bangladesh relations were stable, predictable, and generally positive despite occasional tensions. There were regular diplomatic exchanges, growing trade relationships, and security cooperation on shared challenges. But when her government fell suddenly and dramatically, all those carefully built diplomatic ties and relationships began to weaken rapidly. And into that dangerous power vacuum stepped China, moving with the speed and calculation that has become their trademark in geopolitics. Here is where India made a critical, strategic mistake that is now coming back to haunt the nation. And it involves something as basic as a river. The Teesta River flows through both Indian and Bangladeshi territory, and it is absolutely vital for the agricultural and economic survival of both West Bengal on the Indian side and East Bengal, which is now Bangladesh. Back in 2011, there was a carefully negotiated deal on the table that would have resolved this water sharing issue permanently. Under that proposed agreement, India would receive 42.5% of the water flow, Bangladesh would get 37.5%, and the remaining 20% would be kept in reserve for emergencies and dry seasons. This was a fair and balanced deal that experts on both sides had worked on for years. But then West Bengal's state government at that time rejected this deal for local political reasons. So the agreement remained pending, stuck in bureaucratic and political limbo, and it is still pending today in 2025, 14 years later. Because of this inexcusable confusion and delay, because of petty political games being played while national interests suffered, China found a perfect opportunity to insert itself into the situation. In 2021, even during Sheikh Hasina's government, when relations with India were relatively good, Bangladesh started making public statements about considering China as a partner for the massive Teesta River Management Project. Perhaps it was a negotiating tactic to pressure India. Perhaps Hasina wanted to use the threat of Chinese involvement to extract a better deal from New Delhi. Perhaps it was a bluff designed to make India act faster. But whatever the intention was at that time, that bluff is now costing India enormously because the situation has changed completely. This Chinese involvement gives Beijing two absolutely massive strategic benefits. First, it physically brings Chinese money, Chinese engineers, Chinese workers, and ultimately Chinese influence right up to India's border in a sensitive region. And second, it traps Bangladesh deeper and deeper into China's infamous debt trap diplomacy, where loans that can never be repaid become leverage for political control. And here is what should make every Indian suspicious about the timing of events. Before any final conversation could happen between India and Bangladesh about the Teesta project, before any breakthrough could be achieved in the negotiations, Sheikh Hasina's government suddenly collapsed in violent street protests. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect to be pure coincidence, suspiciously and conveniently perfect for Chinese interests. India's two biggest weaknesses and vulnerabilities, which are endless political infighting and bureaucratic delays that prevent decisive action, gave China exactly the opening and advantage that Beijing needed and wanted. If West Bengal's government had not blocked that water-sharing deal way back in 2011 for narrow political considerations, that agreement would now be 14 years old and firmly established. This is India's own fault and failure. This is a self-inflicted wound that China is now exploiting brilliantly. This year alone, 30 Chinese companies have announced plans to invest $1 billion in Bangladesh. Think about that number carefully. There are no democratic elections happening in Bangladesh right now. The government is not stable or legitimate in any traditional sense. There is mob rule and street violence. Yet somehow $1 billion in Chinese investment is flowing freely without any hesitation. China provided a $400 million loan specifically for developing Mongla Port, which will give Chinese naval vessels a friendly port close to Indian waters. China has opened its massive consumer markets to Bangladeshi products with preferential terms until 2028, providing crucial economic support that makes Bangladesh dependent on Chinese goodwill. As soon as Sheikh Hasina left the country, as soon as the old government fell, China moved in immediately with money, loans, trade deals, and investment promises. Everything came flooding into Bangladesh. China is extremely smart in how it operates and incredibly fast when it sees opportunity. Wherever there is chaos, crisis, or power vacuum anywhere in the world, China acts immediately and decisively. China has a long-term strategy that military analysts call the string of pearls, and understanding this strategy is crucial. China wants to establish a network of ports and naval facilities all around the Indian Ocean, forming a chain or string that encircles India both economically and militarily. The goal is to cut off India's access to crucial sea lanes, to monitor Indian naval movements, and to establish Chinese presence in every direction that India looks. Bangladesh is absolutely crucial and vital for this strategy to succeed because of its location at the top of the Bay of Bengal. While all this high-level geopolitical chess is being played by governments and intelligence agencies, real human beings on the ground are suffering terribly, and their suffering is being ignored. Hindus and other minorities in Bangladesh are being attacked, beaten, and killed on a daily basis now. More than 2,900 documented incidents of violence specifically targeting minorities have occurred since the interim government took power. These are not rumors or propaganda. These are independently verified incidents that include killings, arson attacks on homes and temples, and organized land grabs where Hindu families are forced off their ancestral property. And how does Bangladesh's current leadership respond to this well-documented violence and persecution? Muhammad Yunus, who won a Nobel Prize and is supposed to understand human rights, simply denies that the violence even exists. He dismisses it all as fake news and propaganda. He directly blames India for supposedly spreading lies and exaggerations to make Bangladesh look bad internationally. And when respected international media outlets like the New York Times send their own journalists to Bangladesh and publish detailed reports about the violence they witnessed firsthand, Yunus and his supporters call those reports biased and false. Even worse than the denial is how Yunus has told Hindu victims that they should not seek protection by identifying themselves as Hindus. He actually said publicly that they should simply call themselves Bangladeshi citizens and demand protection on that basis. This is classic victim blaming, telling persecuted people that the problem is how they identify themselves, not the fact that they are being persecuted. There is no ministry or government department for minority protection in Bangladesh. Nobody in the government has been specifically assigned responsibility for ensuring the safety of Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, and other minorities. The minority population of Bangladesh has been declining steadily every single year since 1971. The exact same atrocities and patterns of persecution that happened during the genocide of 1971 are happening again today in 2025, and the world watches with almost complete silence and indifference. If this same level of systematic persecution were happening to any other religious community anywhere in the world, there would be massive international outcry, emergency UN Security Council meetings, economic sanctions, and worldwide protests. But because the victims are Hindus, the world stays quiet and looks the other way. So what are the realistic solutions here? What concrete steps can India take to protect its interests and security? This is not about revenge or aggression. This is about practical strategic thinking. First, India must immediately develop alternative trade routes. India's single biggest geographic vulnerability is the Siliguri Corridor, which people sometimes call chicken's neck because it is so narrow and vulnerable. This is the thin strip of Indian territory that connects the mainland to the entire northeastern region. At its narrowest point, this corridor is only 22 kilometers wide. If Bangladesh ever blocks this corridor militarily, or if China convinces Bangladesh to block it, India's entire northeast gets instantly cut off from the rest of the country. That is why India must focus all necessary resources and attention on completing the KMTTP, which stands for Caledon Multimodal Transit Transport Project. This ambitious project will connect Kolkata in West Bengal to Mizoram in the northeast through Myanmar, completely bypassing both Siliguri and Bangladesh territory. This route is expected to become fully operational by 2027 according to current timelines. Wars in the modern era are won primarily through logistics and supply chains. India lost the border war against China in 1962, mainly because Indian forces were not adequately supplied or prepared for high-altitude warfare. If a similar situation ever arises again, if there is simultaneous pressure on the northeastern border from both China and Bangladesh trying to block the Siliguri Corridor, India absolutely needs alternative routes ready to use immediately. Second, India must create international diplomatic pressure by raising the Bangladesh crisis issue loudly and consistently in every single international forum and gathering. The entire world needs to pay attention to Bangladesh's dangerous instability and what it means regionally. Three sides of Bangladesh are completely surrounded by Indian territory. Instability and chaos in Bangladesh automatically means serious problems for India because of geography and proximity. India must specifically highlight in international discussions that Bangladesh currently owes $900 million to Indian companies for electricity that was supplied in good faith. This massive payment is still pending and being delayed deliberately. Third, India must strengthen border security dramatically. India shares a 4,100-kilometer long border with Bangladesh, which is actually longer than India shares with Pakistan. This border runs through incredibly rough and challenging terrain, including hills, dense forests, rivers, and swamps. It is genuinely difficult to monitor every kilometer effectively, but difficulty cannot become an excuse for inaction or weakness. Physical fencing has been completed for approximately 3,240 kilometers of this border so far, which means roughly 850 to 860 kilometers still remain vulnerable and unfenced. India must work toward implementing a genuine zero-infiltration policy backed by technology and personnel. And now the question that burns in the heart of every patriotic Indian who is watching this situation unfold with growing anger and frustration. Every single day that passes, the hatred against India grows stronger and louder in Bangladesh. Politicians make speeches demanding greater Bangladesh. Student leaders openly talk about breaking India's northeast away. They organize rallies calling India their enemy. They attack Indian diplomatic properties. They systematically persecute Hindu minorities. And what exactly is India doing in response to all this hostility and aggression? India is paying crores and crores of rupees to Bangladeshi cricket players to come play in the Indian Premier League. Why is this happening? Why is India continuing to feed money to a nation that wants to destroy India? Here is a very direct question to the Board of Control for Cricket in India and to those IPL franchise owners who keep buying Bangladeshi players for astronomical sums in auctions. Where exactly is your sense of loyalty to India? Where is your basic nationalism? Where is your self-respect? Or are these uncomfortable questions only meant for common citizens? And please do not say that sports and politics should be kept separate, because that is a naive argument that nobody actually believes anymore. Russia was completely banned from participating in the 2024 Paris Olympics because of their military actions. Western countries have the courage and conviction to stand by their principles even when it hurts economically. Why does India not have that same courage? If Bangladesh is truly and genuinely becoming East Pakistan all over again in terms of ideology, governance, and hostility toward India, then India needs to treat Bangladesh exactly the same way India treats Pakistan. There is no room for weakness or sentimentality when national security is at stake. Leaders and activists from Sheikh Hasina's Awami League party are dying mysteriously while imprisoned by the new regime. Tariq Rahman, who is the son of former President Ziaur Rahman, has returned to Bangladesh after spending 17 years in exile abroad and is clearly positioning himself and his Bangladesh Nationalist Party for elections. Sheikh Hasina, speaking from her exile in India, recently delivered a Christmas message to her supporters back home, directly accusing Muhammad Yunus of being responsible for burning religious minorities alive. India gave Bangladesh its freedom and independence through immense sacrifice. India watched as thousands of its soldiers gave their lives fighting for Bangladesh's liberation. India opened its borders and welcomed 10 million refugees without hesitation when they were fleeing genocide. India spent billions of dollars on military operations and humanitarian aid. India built diplomatic bridges and economic relationships. India offered friendship without asking for anything in return, except peace and mutual respect. And what did India receive in return for all this generosity and sacrifice? Bangladesh today threatens to break India apart, shelters and encourages India's enemies, and burns Indian flags in the streets while chanting anti-India slogans. But here is the crucial thing that Bangladesh's current leaders seem to have forgotten, and it is the same thing that Pakistan forgot back in 1971 and learned the hard way. India is not weak and India is not afraid. India has nuclear weapons, one of the most powerful militaries in the world, and a civilization that has survived and outlasted thousands of years of invasions, foreign occupations, colonizations, and betrayals. India will survive this latest betrayal as well. The real question facing India today is not whether India can defend itself militarily, because of course India can and will defend every single inch of Indian territory. The real question is whether India will finally learn from its repeated mistakes. Will India stop being naive about the intentions of others? Will India stop treating declared enemies as potential friends? Will India start prioritizing long-term national security over short-term political considerations? India's generosity toward other nations is legendary throughout history. India's patience and tolerance seem infinite at times. But here's the question that demands an honest answer. When does patience transform into weakness? When does generosity become foolishness? When does extending the hand of friendship repeatedly become an act of national suicide? India freed Bangladesh from genocide and tyranny in 1971. India can absolutely survive Bangladesh's betrayal and backstabbing in 2025. The question is not about mere survival. The question is fundamentally about self-respect and dignity. If a nation that India gave birth to through blood and sacrifice can become India's bitter enemy within just 50 years, if the liberator can be called a vulture and oppressor by the very people it freed, if gratitude and memory can turn into hatred and conspiracy so quickly and completely, then maybe, just maybe, it is time for India to stop being the world's generous fool who keeps giving without expecting anything in return. Maybe it is time for India to remember and internalize a hard truth that the rest of the world learned long ago. Strength respects strength. Enemies understand consequences, not compassion. The international system does not reward kindness or generosity, but respects and responds only to power and resolve. The choice facing India right now is clear and unavoidable, and the consequences of that choice will shape India's future for decades to come. So here is the final question for every Indian watching this unfold, for every person who cares about India's security and dignity, for every citizen who remembers the sacrifices of 1971. How many more betrayals will India tolerate and absorb before India finally decides that enough is enough? Before India stops extending friendship to those who spit on that friendship, and before India demands the respect and gratitude that its sacrifices have earned?